Stranger pulled widow from Snowstorm, not knowing he would stay forever. The ranch had been their dream once. Thomas built it with his own hands across 5 years, each fence post-driven with hope, each board nailed with the belief that something built this carefully would hold forever. Eleanor remembers the day the roof was finished, how he'd laughed, standing in the doorway, his shoulders wide against the dying light. "This is ours now," he'd said. "This is real. Real things break." The fever came that winter, quick as a gunshot. 1 week, he could still ride out to check the herd. By the second week, he couldn't leave the bed. Eleanor sat beside him in the dark of their bedroom, her hand on his burning forehead, and whispered all the small promises that mean nothing when a man's body decides to betray him. He died in the gray of dawn, his last breath small and ordinary, not grand, not final sounding. Just a breath that didn't come back. They buried him on a ridge overlooking the valley, where he could see the ranch if God allowed such things. Eleanor wore her black dress, and the ranchers came, a handful of them, weathered men in worn suits, awkward in their sadness. They said the words people say. They said he'd been good. They said the land would remember him. They said she'd be all right. The ranchers were wrong about most things. Without Thomas, the work became heavier. Eleanor tried to manage the herd alone, tried to mend fences, tried to keep the corrals clean and the horses fed. She was one woman, and the frontier does not forgive fractions. One spring, drought dried up the creek that ran through their property. The herd grew thin. That summer, raiders came at night and took what cattle remained. Eleanor stood at the window and watched shadows move across her land, thieves in the dark, and she did not raise a rifle. What was the point? What was she fighting for? The house began to fail too. A board rotted through on the south wall. The chimney developed a crack that let snow pour into the living room. She could patch it, but each patch felt like arguing with the end. The end, Eleanor had learned, was patient. The end could wait. By her third winter alone, the silence of the ranch had become a thing with weight and hunger. It filled the rooms. It sat at her dinner table. It watched her from the corners at night. Eleanor began to think of Thomas not as a memory, but as an absence, a shape of a man cut out of everything, leaving the world smaller. She stopped riding out to check the fence lines. She stopped replacing the boards that warped in the cold. She stopped answering when the few neighbors rode by to see if she needed anything. She knew what they saw, a woman vanishing slower than a man dies, but vanishing just the same. On the morning she decided to walk into the blizzard, Eleanor was not afraid. Fear seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. She simply waited until the storm rolled in thick from the north, white sky meeting white earth until there was only white, and she dressed in the clothes she was wearing and walked out the door. The snow was already past her ankles. It was cold enough that she felt the burn in her lungs with each breath, but she knew that would pass. Pain always passes. Everything passes. She had been walking maybe 20 minutes when she heard the horse. At first it was only a sound in the wind, a rhythm that her mind almost dismissed as the sound of her own footsteps. But then it became clearer. The heavy percussion of hooves breaking through snow crust, the jingle of a bridle, the breathing of an animal working hard in weather that punished hard effort. Eleanor did not turn. She kept walking, her skirt heavy with wet snow, her fingers already stiff. "Ma'am." The voice was rough, made deeper by the wind. "Ma'am, you're in the middle of nothing." She stopped. Turning was harder than she expected. Her body had begun to stiffen. The horse was a dark mare, steaming in the cold. On its back was a man, hatted against the snow, his coat collar turned up. He was watching her with the expression of someone who had seen something he didn't expect to find. "I know where I am," Eleanor said. Her voice sounded strange to her, thin, used up. "You're a long way from anywhere," the stranger said. He was maybe 40, maybe older. His face was weathered the way all rancher faces are weathered, carved by sun and wind into something that looked older than years alone could explain. But his eyes were different. They were the eyes of someone who had also learned what it meant to be alone. "You lost." Eleanor wanted to laugh. Lost. as if she could be more lost than she already was. "No," she said. The stranger looked at her for a long moment. The wind moved between them. The snow fell. Behind him, Eleanor could see the outline of more horses. He had a small remuda tied behind him. He was traveling with supplies, provisions for a long journey into hard country. "My horse won't go further in this," he said. "There's a ranch house, maybe half a mile back the way I came. We need shelter." Eleanor understood, in the way that broken people sometimes do, that this was a choice being offered to her. Not in what he was saying, but in how he was looking at her, with a recognition that seemed to see right through her clothes and skin to something true underneath. "I don't have much," she heard herself say. "I didn't ask for much," the stranger replied. He reached down, his hand weathered and large, and Eleanor took it without thinking. He pulled her up behind him on the horse with surprising gentleness, as if he knew that any sudden motion might shatter her. The mare turned, knowing the direction the stranger intended, and they began to move through the white. Eleanor's arms were around his coat, steadying herself. She could feel the warmth of his body, the solidity of him, a real thing, like Thomas's ranch had been real, like hope had been real once. She closed her eyes and let the horse carry her, and for the first time in a long time, she did not think about letting go. Behind them, the blizzard erased their tracks almost immediately, as if their journey was being unmade even as they moved through it. And somewhere ahead, though Eleanor could not see it, the small ranch house waited with its failing roof and its empty rooms, ready, it seemed, to hold more than one person's grief. The stranger's silence was deeper than the snow. He asked no questions as they rode. He did not ask her name or explain his own. He simply moved through the white with the certainty of someone who knew this kind of weather, and Eleanor understood that he, too, was a person running toward something or away from it. Perhaps it did not matter which. What mattered was that the horse moved forward. What mattered was that she was no longer walking alone into the disappearing. The first week, Jack did not leave the barn. Eleanor had prepared the small bedroom upstairs, the one that had been meant for children who never came, and left a lamp burning in the window. But when she woke in the dark of the second night and looked outside, she saw him still sitting by the barn's open door, his silhouette against the starlight. He had a rifle across his knees. He was watching the ridgeline. She did not ask him why. Instead, Eleanor began to leave food on the bench outside the barn. Biscuits wrapped in cloth, a plate of beans, a cup of coffee at dawn, still steaming. Jack took these offerings without ever entering the house, and she understood that he was trying to give her a choice, the choice to unmake him if she wanted to pretend he was only a drifter passing through, nothing that required her to be responsible for his presence. But by the third morning, his horse had moved from the hitching post to the corral, where she kept her own mare. By the fourth day, his bedroll had moved from outside the barn to the wooden chair in the corner of the kitchen, a compromise between staying and leaving, between being part of the house and remaining outside it. Eleanor never asked him to make any choice at all. She simply kept leaving the food. She simply left the lamp burning. By the second week, Jack began to work. There was much that needed doing on a widow's ranch, work that had been waiting, patient and growing, like debts that accumulate when no one is strong enough to pay them down. The south wall needed boards replaced. The fence line between Eleanor's property and the neighbors had fallen in 3 places. The corral gate hung from one hinge, creaking in the wind like a small, helpless sound. Jack worked with his hands the way other men pray. He did not rush. He did not complain. He simply moved from one broken thing to the next, and Eleanor watched from the kitchen window as the ranch began to remember what it had been, a place where something was being built, not just maintained against inevitable collapse. His hands were scarred. She noticed this as he mended the gate, his fingers moving with practiced economy over the broken hinge. The scars were old, white lines across brown skin, the kind that came from violence or hard labor, or both. Eleanor did not ask which. She also did not ask about the way he moved. There was something in his body that spoke of a man accustomed to watching for danger. When she came up behind him one afternoon while he was working on the fence, he turned so quickly that she nearly stepped back. His hand moved toward his side, toward where a gun would hang if he wore one openly. But then his eyes focused on her face, and something in him seemed to settle, like water becoming still again. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. "I didn't mean—" "It's all right," Eleanor said, though it was not all right. It was strange, and it was wrong, and it was something that made her skin prickle with the knowledge that this man, this stranger she had pulled from a blizzard and allowed into her home, was not the kind of man who startled easily. He was the kind of man who flinched at sudden sounds, because sudden sounds had meant death to him. Or worse. By the 4th week, Eleanor had learned his small habits. He took his coffee black and never sweetened it. He ate like someone who had known real hunger, not the hunger that makes you thin, but the hunger that lives inside a man forever, even after his belly is full. He was left-handed. He had a scar across his collarbone that he always kept covered, even when he was working in the heat and other men would have shed their shirts. His eyes were the color of winter water, gray-blue, deep, and they held something that looked like an old injury that had never quite healed. She began to notice other things. One evening, as they sat by the fire, a ritual that had developed between them, unplanned but necessary, Eleanor saw Jack pull a piece of paper from his coat. It was yellowed and worn, folded many times. He looked at it for a long moment in the firelight, and his jaw tightened. Then, without showing it to her, he held it to the flames. The paper caught fire quickly. The edges curled black. Eleanor watched his face, watched the way the firelight moved across features that seemed carved from something harder than flesh, and she understood that she had just witnessed him burning something that had mattered, something that had maybe been following him. "Jack," she said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken his name aloud to him. "Who are you?" He did not look at her. He watched the paper burn until there was nothing left but ash. "Someone who needs to be nowhere," he said finally. "Someone the world thinks is somewhere else." Eleanor waited, but he did not say more. The fire crackled. The wind moved around the edges of the house like something trying to get in. She understood that he had just told her the closest thing to the truth he might ever tell her. Not his name, not his past, but an acknowledgement that he was a man carrying secrets the way other men carry guns. They were part of him. They were dangerous. And by letting him stay, Eleanor had invited that danger into her home. She should have asked him to leave. A sensible woman would have. A woman with sense would have understood that a man who burns documents and flinches at loud sounds and wears a scar he refuses to show is not a man to be trusted with safety or peace. But Eleanor had learned, in the long months of her grief, that sense was not always the same as truth. The truth was that this man had pulled her from the snow when she had walked into it deliberately. The truth was that her ranch was no longer a place of failure and emptiness. The truth was that for the first time since Thomas died, she looked forward to the morning, not because she wanted to live, but because she wanted to see Jack's face across the breakfast table, wanted to watch him work, wanted to sit beside his silence, and know that she was not alone in hers. The danger was real. Eleanor knew this. But so was the redemption. And she was not yet sure which one mattered more. That night, she did not ask him to explain the burned paper. She did not ask his real name or what crime he might have committed or who was looking for him. Instead, she simply sat beside him in the firelight and said nothing at all. And in that silence, something passed between them. Something like understanding. Something like trust. But trust, Eleanor was beginning to learn, was a luxury. And luxuries in the frontier always had a price. Outside, in the darkness beyond the ranch, the world was still turning. And somewhere in it, there were men who remembered things. There were sheriffs and bounty hunters and men with vengeance in their hearts. There were wanted posters with faces on them. And Eleanor, who had invited a stranger into her home, had just made a choice that would change the shape of her life forever, though she did not yet know it. They came at first light. 3 horses, moving steady through the silver of early morning. Eleanor was already awake. She had learned to wake when Jack woke, her body attuned to his restlessness. and she saw them from the kitchen window before they saw the house. The men wore long coats against the cold. They wore hats and badges and the particular kind of stillness that came from carrying authority and guns. A sheriff and 2 deputies. Eleanor knew this before they dismounted. She had lived long enough on the frontier to recognize law when it arrived on horseback. Jack was in the barn. He had been there since before dawn, tending to the horses, doing the early work that kept a ranch alive. Eleanor did not run to warn him. Instead, she stood very still in her kitchen and watched the 3 men approach her door. She understood, in the way that people sometimes understand terrible things, that this moment had always been coming. It had been coming since the day she pulled him from the snow. The sheriff knocked, not a gentle knock. A knock that meant authority, that meant power, that meant the law was now inside the circle of her home, whether she invited it or not. Eleanor opened the door. The sheriff was an older man, maybe 60, with gray whiskers and eyes that had learned to see through lies. Behind him, the 2 deputies were younger, harder, built like men who had spent their lives removing problems from towns and ranches. "Ma'am," the sheriff said. He tipped his hat. There was no warmth in the gesture. "I'm Sheriff Colton. We're looking for a man. Goes by several names. We have reason to believe he passed through this territory." Eleanor's heart was moving too fast. She forced it to slow. She had become good at controlling her body, at making her face show nothing. Grief had taught her that. "I don't know many men," she said. Her voice was steady. "I live alone." "That's so." The sheriff stepped slightly to the side, and Eleanor understood that he was trying to see past her into the house. "Neighbors say they've seen fresh tracks on your property. Smoke from your chimney in the evenings. More than would be normal for a widow." He was not being cruel. He was simply stating facts the way a sheriff states facts. But Eleanor felt the cruelty anyway. The way he was implying that her solitude was suspicious, that her attempt to survive alone was somehow evidence of something worse. "A widow needs help sometimes," Eleanor said carefully. "There are always travelers, men passing through. I feed them and they move on." The sheriff looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, one of the deputies had moved slightly away, was looking toward the barn. Eleanor saw the movement and understood what it meant. They were not just here to ask questions. They were here to search. "We're looking for someone specific," the sheriff said. He pulled a paper from his coat. It was yellowed and worn. It was a wanted poster. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the outline of a face that had been drawn from memory or imagination, rough and dark and not quite right, but with something true underneath the roughness. "There was a robbery," the sheriff continued. "4 weeks ago down south. General store. Bank. A man matching this description was involved." "I don't," Eleanor began, but the sheriff held up his hand. "3 people died," he said simply. "A store clerk, a customer, a young boy maybe 10 years old, was caught in the crossfire." Eleanor felt something break inside her chest. She did not let it show on her face. "I haven't seen this man," she said. It was a lie. She knew it was a lie. The sheriff knew it was a lie. But they stood at the threshold of her home, and Eleanor had just made a choice so profound that it would ripple through the rest of her life like a stone dropped into still water. "May we look around?" the sheriff asked. It was not really a question. "No," Eleanor said. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Behind him, the deputies tensed slightly, hands moving closer to their guns. Eleanor understood that she had just stepped across a line, that she had just made herself an accomplice, that she had just chosen a man over the law, chosen love over order. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." "No," Eleanor said again. She did not know where the courage came from. She did not know where the strength came from. But she stood in her doorway, and she did not move. "This is my land. This is my home. You do not have my permission to search it." She did not know if this was true. She did not know what the law said about a sheriff's rights on private property. But she knew that if they searched the barn, they would find him. And if they found him, he would resist. And if he resisted, they would shoot him. She understood this sequence as clearly as if it had already happened. The sheriff was quiet for a very long time. Eleanor could feel the weight of his authority pressing against her, trying to move her, trying to bend her to the shape of his will. But Eleanor had already been broken. She had already learned that some things matter more than safety. "There's money on his head," the sheriff said finally. $500. That's more than a widow would make in 5 years. You could use that. You could rebuild this place. Eleanor looked at him. She saw a man doing his job. She saw a man trying to catch a criminal. She saw a man who believed, with absolute certainty, that he was on the side of right. But Eleanor had learned, in her months with Jack, that right was sometimes more complicated than badges suggested. "I don't want the money," she said. The sheriff nodded slowly. He folded the wanted poster and put it back in his coat. "You understand what you're doing?" he asked. "You understand that by refusing to cooperate with the law, you become complicit in his crimes? That you could face charges yourself?" "Yes," Eleanor said. She did not know if this was true either. She did not know what laws covered the kind of choice she was making. But she knew that she was making it. She knew that she was stepping outside the world she had inhabited, the world of respectability and widowhood and acceptable grief. She was stepping into something else, something stranger, something dangerous. The sheriff looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. The deputies followed, but not before one of them looked back at the ranch house with an expression that mixed anger and something that might have been respect. They rode away without another word. Eleanor stood in her doorway and watched them go. Her hands were shaking now, shaking with adrenaline, with fear, with a profound understanding that she had just changed the course of her life, that she had made a choice that could not be unmade. She did not go to the barn immediately. She could not. She stood in her kitchen and looked at the wanted poster, the one the sheriff had left behind, the one that had fallen to her floor when he turned to leave. She looked at Jack's face, rough and dark and not quite right, and she understood that she did not know who this man was. She did not know if he was guilty or innocent. She did not know if she had just saved a good man or damned herself for a villain. But she knew that she could not let them take him. She folded the poster and held it over the fire, watching it burn the way she had watched him burn documents in the darkness. And then she walked to the barn to tell him what she had done. Jack was waiting in the shadows, his hand on a rifle, his face carved from stone. He already knew. Of course, he already knew. He had been listening, had heard every word. "You should have let them take me," he said quietly. "I couldn't," Eleanor replied. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. It was not gratitude. It was something more complicated. It was the look of a man who had just realized that he had cost someone everything, and that this woman was willing to pay the price. "Then we have to leave," he said. "Tonight. They'll come back with more men. They'll burn the house if they have to." Eleanor nodded. She understood this. She had known at the moment she lied to the sheriff. Her life on this ranch, the life Thomas had built, the life she had tried to maintain, was over. She had chosen something else instead, and she still did not know if it would save her or destroy her. The Badlands were beautiful in a way that made Eleanor understand why men lost themselves there. The rocks rose up in shapes that looked carved by ancient hands, red and purple and gold in the shifting light. There was no water. There were no towns. There was nothing but emptiness and stone and the thin sound of wind moving through canyons that had been there long before any human walked them. Eleanor had never been to a place so far from civilization, and she understood, riding through it with Jack, that civilization was a choice. That some people chose it, and some people chose this instead, the endless, unforgiving quiet. They rode for 3 days and 3 nights, stopping only to rest the horses. Jack did not speak. Eleanor did not ask him to. She had made her choice, and now she was living inside it, and the shape of that choice was becoming clearer with each mile they traveled away from the ranch. On the 4th day, they stopped at a canyon where a thin stream of water ran over dark rocks. They built no fire. They ate the jerky and hardtack that Jack had packed, and they sat in the shadow of the rocks and did not speak. But finally, as the sun was beginning to set and the shadows were growing long, Jack began to talk. "My sister was sick," he said. His voice sounded like it came from very far away. Real sick. The kind of sick where you watch someone die in front of you and you can't stop it. She had 3 children. No husband. No money. I had been working for a rancher down south, but the work had dried up. The rancher wasn't paying. We were hungry, Eleanor. All of us. Starving the way you starve when there's no food and no work and no one who cares if you live or die. Eleanor listened. She did not interrupt. She understood that he was telling her a story that he had been carrying alone, and that by finally speaking it, he was giving her the chance to decide if she could live with it. There was a robbery planned, Jack continued. A general store and a bank. The men doing it needed a 4th person, someone to watch the horses, to keep the animals calm. I took the job because they promised money. Enough to feed Sarah and her children for a year. Enough to give them a chance. He was quiet for a long time. Eleanor could see his hands in the fading light, could see how they were trembling. The robbery was supposed to be simple, he said. In and out. No one was supposed to get hurt. But someone tried to be brave. A store clerk. He came at one of the men with a gun, and there was a shot. Then there were more shots. People started running. People started dying. I didn't fire a gun, Eleanor. I swear to God, I didn't fire a gun. But 3 people died anyway. And one of them was a child. Eleanor looked at him. She could see the weight of it, the weight of carrying that knowledge, of knowing that his choice to rob the store had set in motion a chain of events that had ended in death. Of knowing that he had not pulled the trigger, but that he had pulled something else, and that something else had cost lives. Sarah died anyway, Jack said quietly. 6 weeks after the robbery. She made it through that winter, but her lungs were already gone. She coughed blood for weeks. And then she died. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. She did not say that it was all right. She did not say that he was forgiven. She only held his hand and sat with him in the shadow of the rocks as the sun continued to fall and the day continued to die. I've been running ever since, Jack said. I took the reward money and bought horses and supplies, and I've been trying to get far enough away that it wouldn't matter, that I could just be a drifter, a stranger, a man without a past. And for a while, I thought it was working. And then the blizzard came, and I found you, and I thought, he stopped. What did you think? Eleanor asked. I thought maybe I could stop running, Jack said. I thought maybe I could be someone else. Someone who mattered. Someone who could build something instead of destroy it. Eleanor squeezed his hand. She could feel the scars there, the work-worn calluses, the tremor that came from exhaustion and grief, and the weight of carrying terrible knowledge alone. You don't have to run anymore, she said. Jack looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made Eleanor understand that he had heard what she was saying, that he understood the offer she was making, the offer to stay, to try, to be different. But he shook his head. I have to turn myself in, he said. I have to face what I did. I have to stand in front of a judge and tell them the truth, and I have to accept whatever comes next. They'll hang you, Eleanor said. It was not a question. Maybe, Jack said. Or maybe they won't. I don't know. But I know that I can't keep running. I know that every day I stay hidden. Every day I'm with you. I'm dragging you deeper into something that will destroy you. The law will keep looking. And when they find us, and they will find us, you'll go down with me. Eleanor understood that he was right. She understood that she had already sacrificed everything, and that if she continued to follow him, she would lose even the possibility of redemption for herself. She understood that love sometimes meant letting go. When? She asked. Tomorrow, Jack said. At sunrise. I'll ride into the nearest town. I'll walk into the sheriff's office and tell them who I am. I'll confess to the robbery. I'll tell them everything. Eleanor did not sleep that night. She sat beside Jack in the darkness and listened to him breathe, and she tried to memorize the shape of him, the outline of his shoulders, the sound of his voice, the way his presence had changed the shape of her world. When dawn came, they rode to the ridge that overlooked the valley below. in the distance, Eleanor could see the town, a small collection of buildings that looked like toys from this height. A frontier town, the kind of place where justice was dispensed and law was enforced, and men faced the consequences of their choices. Jack dismounted. He took Eleanor's hands in his. "You changed my life," he said. "You pulled me from the snow and gave me a reason to believe that I could be more than what I've done. That's a gift, Eleanor. That's redemption, even if I have to pay for it with my life." "What will you do?" Eleanor asked. "If they don't hang you?" Jack looked toward the town. "I don't know," he said. "Prison, maybe. Years, certainly. Enough that by the time I'm released, you'll have built a new life. You'll have forgotten me." "I won't forget you," Eleanor said. "Good," Jack said. "But I want you to try." He mounted his horse. Eleanor stood on the ridge and watched as he began to ride down toward the town. She watched as his figure grew smaller, as the distance between them grew larger, as the man who had saved her began to ride toward his own reckoning. And Eleanor understood, standing there in the morning light, that this was what redemption actually looked like. It did not look like escape. It did not look like running away into Badlands and becoming someone else. It looked like facing what you had done. It looked like accepting consequences. It looked like choosing the hard thing because it was right. It looked like a man riding toward the sunrise, knowing what waited for him there. Eleanor did not cry. She simply stood on the ridge and watched until Jack disappeared into the town. And then she understood something that would take her years to fully comprehend. That being saved was not the same as being rescued. That the moment Jack had pulled her from the snow, he had not saved her. He had only given her the chance to save herself. And that was all anyone could ever do for anyone else. She turned her horse away from the ridge. She did not know where she would go, but she knew that she could go, that she could live, that she had learned in the dust and silence of the frontier that broken people could mend each other long enough to find their own way back to wholeness. Behind her, somewhere in the town below, Jack was walking into a sheriff's office and beginning to tell the truth. And Eleanor rode on, carrying something that was neither grief nor joy, but something in between, something like hope, or maybe something like peace. She did not know if she would ever see him again, but she knew that she would never be the same person who had walked into the blizzard, seeking to disappear. She knew that she would live. She knew that she could choose connection again, could choose to matter, could choose to be part of a world that was broken and difficult and full of meaning. And that was enough. That would have to be enough. Because sometimes love does not last forever. Sometimes it only lasts long enough to save you. And sometimes that is the greatest gift one person can give another, not a forever, but a second chance. Not a rescue, but the courage to rescue yourself.